Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know it's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on.
Welcome back, everyone. So, you know how we usually take interesting articles, studies, maybe some online chatter you send us, and really get into it?
Yeah, dig deep to find the core ideas.
Well, today's a bit different. We're stepping into, well, let's call it the realm of the thought experiment. Kind of a weird one, actually.
You sent over some, let's say, very enthusiastic online discussions based on a pretty wild idea.
Wild is one word for it.
And we figured, okay, let's dive in. Why not?
So our mission for this deep dive, and yes, we chose to accept it, is to unpack this hypothetical concept of a greater India that, and here's the kicker, somehow includes China.
Right.
We're going to look at the, let's be generous and call them arguments someone might try to use.
Flimsy arguments, perhaps.
Extremely flimsy. And then think about the chaos that might ensue and what this whole, frankly, absurd scenario can maybe tell us about some very real, very serious claims happening in the world.
Exactly. It's like holding up a strange mirror to some tense situations.
Yeah.
Even though the starting point is hypothetical, maybe even a bit silly.
More than a bit.
Okay, fair enough. It actually lets us get at some interesting points about how national identity gets built, how history gets used, or sometimes misused.
Weaponized, even. All right, let's jump in. The core idea, and let's just say it sounds completely bonkers, is arguing that China is part of India.
Yeah, your first reaction is probably wit.
Exactly. But the discussions we looked at actually tried to sketch out the types of arguments someone might use. So what were they grasping at? What are these threads?
Well, the arguments, they're not exactly built on solid ground, you know.
Yeah.
But they seem to touch on a few main areas. First, there's cultural links.
Okay.
Specifically, the spread of Buddhism from India to China. But instead of seeing it as like a historical exchange.
Which it was.
Right. They frame it more as this deep, almost one-way infusion. The argument sort of implies that Chinese culture was so profoundly shaped by India via Buddhism that it's, I guess, fundamentally linked or even an extension.
Okay, so it's kind of like saying, you really liked our inventions, so now your workshop belongs to us.
Huh. That's one way to put it. It's definitely a leap.
A massive leap. But I see the kind of thinking, twisting a shared history into a claim. We see that a lot, don't we?
We do. Then there's the geography argument.
Oh, this should be good.
So the Himalayas, most people see them as a pretty significant border, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tallest mountains in the world. Kind of hard to miss.
Well, in this line of argument, they're reimagined as a natural bridge.
A bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Implying some sort of underlying unity between the regions, just sort of glossing over the massive mountain range thing.
Right. Just smoothing over Everest like it's a speed bump. Okay. Creative geography. What else is in the justification toolkit?
And then it gets, well, even stranger. There's mention of a prediction, apparently from someone called a future person from 2062, something seen on YouTube.
A time traveler. Seriously?
Apparently. The claim is that this figure predicted India will unify Asia and China will just stop existing.
Okay. Wow. Just poof.
Yeah. Now, it's crucial. The sources do call this an urban legend. Zero scientific basis, obviously.
Well, obviously.
But it adds this, like, mystical or prophetic element to the whole hypothetical case.
A little dash of sci-fi prophecy in our geopolitical stew. Lovely. Okay, what about slightly more grounded arguments like numbers, money?
Right. So then they move to demographics and economics, pointing out that India's population passed China's in 2023.
Yep, heard about that.
And then citing projections, like one mentioned, suggesting India could become the world's second largest economy by, say, 2075.
Okay. And the leap from that is?
The leap seems to be that India's rising influence, population, economic growth, it all points towards future dominance in Asia. And somehow this might lead to China being absorbed.
So the logic is, we're getting bigger and richer, therefore you belong to us.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. It's bold.
Bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. Okay, and finally, there's this idea of Greater India itself, right? Usually that means areas historically influenced by Indian culture, South Asia, Southeast Asia.
Central Asia, too, sometimes. It's about the cultural sphere, the Indic sphere.
So how do they stretch that to include China?
By leaning heavily on that Buddhism argument again, they argue that because Buddhism went to China, China effectively became a major extension of Indian culture.
So they retroactively redraw the map of the Indic sphere based on that one connection.
Pretty much. Redefining the boundaries to fit the conclusion they want.
Okay, so summing up these arguments, we've got a stretched cultural link, imaginary geography, a YouTube prophecy, demographic destiny, and a redrawn cultural map.
Sounds about right. A real mix.
And the sources rightly call this Sate sophistry, arguments designed to trick, not to find truth. Okay, so that's the shaky foundation. But let's shift gears. What if someone actually believed this? Imagine a hypothetical person in India raised from day one to think China is part of India. How would that even work in their head? What would their worldview be like?
That's where it gets really interesting, psychologically speaking. This person would likely have a massive cognitive bias, wouldn't they?
For sure.
They'd probably see China not as a separate country, but as like an extension of India, or maybe lost territory.
Right, like a province that just hasn't gotten the memo yet.
Exactly. And they'd constantly look for information that confirms this belief, focusing hard on Buddhism's history, maybe.
While totally ignoring or just dismissing all the evidence of China's own long independent history and, its actual existence as a sovereign nation today.
Precisely. Confirmation bias cranked up to 11. Their view of history would be incredibly skewed.
What about nationalism? How would that manifest?
Oh, their sense of nationalism would likely be super intense, fueled by this idea that India has a rightful claim, maybe even a duty, to reclaim or unify with China.
So India as the rightful center of Asia, and China's independence is what? An anomaly, an insult.
Could be seen that way. Confusion, maybe resentment. And think about border disputes, like Aksai Chin.
Yeah.
For this person, that wouldn't be a complex territorial issue between two countries. It might just be seen as India rightly taking back what's already theirs, a reclamation.
Wow. That completely changes the perspective. But, okay, reality has to intrude at some point, right? What happens when they see international news? Or talk to someone from China? Or just look at a world map?
Yeah, that's the cognitive dissonance problem.
Yeah.
That clash between the deeply ingrained belief and the overwhelming evidence of reality.
It must be pretty uncomfortable.
Hugely uncomfortable. And people react differently. Some might just double down, cling even harder to the belief, maybe dismiss contradictory evidence as foreign propaganda or something.
Find explanations that fit their narrative.
Exactly. But others might start to question. The dissonance can become too much, leading them to genuinely reevaluate what they were taught. That could be a huge internal struggle.
I can imagine. And how would this belief system play out in their social life, interactions?
Well, within India, they might gravitate towards others who share this belief, maybe join nationalist groups or online forums where it's reinforced, creating an echo chamber.
Makes sense.
But interactions with, say, Chinese people, that could get really awkward or even hostile.
How so?
They might act superior, implying Chinese culture is just derivative of India's, or worse, try to convince Chinese people that they're actually Indian.
Yeah, I can see that not going over well.
Probably not. And their view of other cultures might also be warped, favoring those they see as more Indic.
So it creates this very specific, potentially abrasive way of engaging with the world. Okay, let's scale this up. What if this wasn't just one person, but a significant belief within the country? What are the international implications?
If it became widespread part of a national ideology, that could be incredibly dangerous. You could see nationalist movements pushing for this unification.
Which would obviously crater India-China relations, diplomatic crises, maybe worse.
Absolutely. And internationally.
Yeah.
India's image would take a massive hit.
Yeah.
The claim would just seem irrational, completely detached from reality.
You'd lose credibility.
Totally.
Oh.
And in sensitive areas, diplomacy, military talks, media people holding these beliefs could easily escalate tensions through misunderstandings or just acting on their skewed reality.
And let's not forget our friend, the future person from 2062, if someone believed that prophecy too.
Oh, that has a whole other layer. It could give their belief a sense of, like, destiny. It's not just something they want, it's fated to happen.
So it becomes almost a religious or mystical conviction.
It could. They might see themselves as working towards this inevitable future, maybe view China's current existence as just a temporary hurdle, or even some kind of conspiracy like a Western plot to stop India's destiny.
Man, this thought experiment just gets weirder and weirder. Okay, let's bring this into a more concrete setting. The sources use this fascinating device, a simulated UN Security Council meeting in 2026. Can you set that scene?
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. Imagine an emergency meeting called because India has just suddenly declared China is part of India, out of the blue.
Okay, tense room. Who's talking?
Well, first up is the Indian representative, a Mr. Sharma.
And what's his opening gambit?
He basically lays out the whole claim. Says China's been part of India since Emperor Ashoka, uses the Buddhism argument, mentions supposed ancient Indian artifacts found in China.
Dubious artifacts, I'm guessing.
Highly dubious, yes. And he demands everyone respect the One India principle. And crucially, he says India doesn't rule out any means necessary for unification.
Whoa. Okay, strong start. Not exactly subtle. How does the Chinese representative, Mrs. Liu, respond to that?
Predictably, she's furious. Calls it historical fabrication, political interference, a serious violation of China's sovereignty. Basically pure outrage and rejection.
Understandable. Now, the source mentions an observer from Taiwan, Mr. Lin. What's his contribution? I think it's interesting.
Yes. Mr. Lin reportedly offers a very sarcastic comment. Something like, he now understands India's newfound interest in imaginary sovereignty.
Oof.
And then suggests maybe China could learn from Taiwan's experience of living without recognition.
Wow. That's a direct hit. Twisting the knife there.
Definitely a pointed remark highlighting the hypocrisy from his perspective.
And the U.S., what does their representative, Ms. Taylor, say? Do they pick a side?
Classic diplomacy. Ms. Taylor gives a very vague statement. Supports peaceful resolution, you know the drill. But importantly, the U.S. doesn't recognize China as part of India, nor does it support any unilateral changes, walking that fine line.
So, non-committal, the irony in that whole scenario is just, wow, India making these absurd claims about China, mirroring so closely China's actual claims about Taiwan.
Exactly. The simulation makes that parallel impossible to ignore. And then there's the final line from the Indian representative. As he leaves, he apparently says something like, if the fantasy is big enough, it can become the truth. Wasn't that what we taught China?
Chilling. That really drives home how these narratives, however unreal, can be politically powerful.
It really does. It shows how national identity is this construct that nations guard fiercely, and trying to rewrite someone else's is always going to cause conflict.
Okay, so let's pull back from the hypothetical UN drama, connecting this whole thought experiment back to the real world, especially the China-Taiwan situation. What's the core danger this highlights?
The fundamental danger lies in basing policy and national identity on something that's just not objectively true. A wish, a belief, but not reality.
Like India hypothetically claiming China or China actually claiming Taiwan.
Exactly. It's that disconnects from fact.
Yeah.
And when you add strong nationalistic emotions into that mix, that's when things get really risky.
So nationalism is the accelerant here.
It acts like a huge amplifier, yeah.
Yeah.
Psychologically, it boosts group identity, us versus them. It creates echo chambers where the belief is reinforced. It mobilizes people emotionally.
And then society spreads it.
Through things like education systems, propaganda, media, online groups. It becomes normalized, even unquestionable for many. And politically, leaders can exploit these narratives to gain support, distract from other issues, or use them in international power plays.
And the potential outcomes when this mix gets potent enough?
They range from bad to catastrophic. Social division, internal conflict, definitely international tension, diplomatic breakdowns, and the worst cases, actual armed conflict. Plus potential human rights issues within the territory being claimed.
It's a grim picture.
It is. When a powerful nation acts on a non-factual claim driven by intense nationalism, the risk of destabilization is very real.
So the bottom line message seems to be, whether it's based on imagination, faith, sophistry, whatever, this idea of China being part of India, much like the insistence that Taiwan is part of China, is fundamentally a wish, not a fact.
A non-objective, factually unsupported wish, and combine that wish with nationalism.
And you get a dangerous brew. And we shouldn't forget those Essel elements, the weird supernatural stuff like the future prophecy.
Right. Even though they're baseless, those kinds of things can add a powerful emotional charge. They tap into something irrational, make the belief feel deeper, more destined, even harder to question for those who buy into it.
It adds another layer of complexity and potential danger. Okay, So that was quite the journey through a very strange hypothetical. We looked at the flimsy arguments, the possible mindset, the fictional UN chaos. What's the main thing you think we should take away from this deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is how this absurd scenario really highlights the dangers lurking within any nationalistic claim that isn't grounded in reality, especially when strong emotions get involved. It's like an exaggerated mirror showing us real-world tensions and the potential for conflict when narratives drift too far from truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we see narratives that seem, well, maybe not this outlandish, but certainly questionable, gain real traction?
All the time.
And what's our role as individuals in looking critically at these claims, whether they're based on history, culture, economics, or even, supposed prophecies?
It's a crucial question.
Definitely something to chew on, the power these constructed stories have in shaping everything from personal identity to global politics. And speaking of things worth checking out, you should definitely take a look at our friend Mickey's YouTube channel. Seriously fun stuff over there.
Good recommendation.
Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep questioning.